Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to What You Want, and thanks for logging on. I had to pause out of sheer deference the changeover of the minute wheel of the Lange Sohne Zeitwerk 42mm in 18-karat white gold is one of the truly thrilling sights in high horology. I've been waiting for this review for a long time because you're looking at possibly the most enchanting, beguiling, and downright hypnotic luxury watch available today. Since its launch in 2009, the Zeitwerk from Lange Sohne of Saxony immediately won the Aiguille d'Or at the Grand Prix d'Horlogerie in Geneva, watchmaking's version of the Academy Awards, the Oscars. It takes the iconic Lange outsized date indication window and revives the late 19th century Joseph Paul Weber digital hour-minute system, but with finish and refinement unimaginable in the 80s. And by the 80s, I mean the 1980s, not the 1880s. This watch represents a step forward for the entire watch industry and one of the most thrilling executions of traditional mechanical watchmaking that you can buy at any price. Now you can see the signature of the Zeitwerk. It's that jumping double digital minute and 10-minute indication. Now it has a jump hour as well, but it's the ability to create this double digital jump minute that really sets this one apart. Now I want to put the watch on the wrist, but not gloss over the importance of the dial. So we'll get back to the aesthetics, but let's talk about the fit briefly. The bottom line is this thing is huge for a Lange. Now they're generally more discreet in size, more traditional in their proportion, and their outright mass. We've even seen at the Salon International this year, Lange started to back off from the 48 and the 38mm cases and size down, even to the point of 35. Well, the Zeitwerk will have none of that. This is a 42. It's actually exactly the same size as the old Grand Lange. So the 41.9 42, this watch is bigger than the current Grand Lange. Nice and substantial, over 12 millimeters, 12.6 millimeters thick to be exact. It's not too big, although it has very strong lugs, and you can see on my wrist 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference. The Zeitwerk has a presence, a size, and a visibility that clearly sets it apart, as if the dial itself didn't already from the rest of the Lange catalog. And with the exception of the truly immense double split and grand complication, this is one of the largest, if not the largest Lange you'll ever see on even a semi-routine basis. Not that there is anything routine about the Zeitwerk. However, it is comfortable, and Lange thoughtfully pairs it with a beautifully crafted, hand-stitched alligator skin, lightly bolstered leather strap with a traditional pin buckle. It's very discreet, traditional, and even a little bit understated until you get to the timepiece itself. Now, this is one of the few watches with a dial that really reminds me of the physiognomies, the features of a face. I feel like when I'm looking at the Zeitwerk, it's almost like it's looking back at me. It's either got a face and facial features to it, or it feels like a gauge off of some 19th century time machine. I don't know how to describe it other than it's very compelling. It's arresting, and your eyes fixate on the hours and the minutes because it has a beautiful symmetry about it. There's what Lange calls the time bridge, which links the jump hour to the jump minutes. And make no mistake, what you're actually looking at with that inset metallic piece is a physical piece of the movement itself. The Lange caliber L043.1 is evident on both sides of this watch, and you can actually see a synthetic sapphire right there that's part of the pivot for the double digital minute and 10-minute wheel. So you're looking at one of the pivots of the movement here, and the entire time bridge, as it's called, is rhodium plated nickel copper or German silver. Now I'll show you the movement in a moment, and that is non-rhodium plated raw German silver. You'll see the difference in tone. But for the white gold watch with the matte black dial, Lange deliberately chose to rhodium coat the time bridge. And you can see it's almost Baroque. Although simple, unadorned with few extraneous features, it's so different, it's so expressive and off the beaten path for hyper-traditional Lange Sohne that it seems almost outrageous. But it is beautifully proportioned and beautifully balanced with the Lange Sohne marquee across the top. The note that this watch is made in Glashütte in Saxony, and I will say for those out there, I know it's Glashütte, my mistake. But let's focus on the features here. Power reserve traces the arc of 36 hours of continuous power supply from a most unconventional of mainspring barrels. Now, 36 hours may not seem like much, but given the absolute titanic power demands of this continuously jumping minute indication, 36 is actually very impressive, and I'll show you how long it does that in just a moment. But you can see the constant seconds at 6 o'clock. So you have this vertical axis that splits the dial for bilateral symmetry. So, like I said, there is an almost facial logic to the layout, with the vertical and the horizontal kind of biaxial basis for the dial. You do almost feel as though the Zeitwerk is gazing back at you, and it is an imposing visage. Now I want to focus on the crown for a moment because, like the rest of the watch, it's just a little bit different. But I want to emphasize that it still retains hacking seconds, so functionality is not overlooked. And if you want to set your watch precisely to the second, Lange gives you that ability. Likewise, when you wind the Zeitwerk, it has a very pronounced detent. It takes a tremendous amount of effort because the mainspring is immense, not so much in length, but in thickness and strength. It took a new order of mainspring strength to make this movement and its 36-hour power reserve possible. So when you turn this crown, not only do you hear it in incredibly pronounced fashion, but it really does fight you with pronounced resistance and very solid tactile detents as you turn it through its resistance. Very impressive, very substantial, and it gives you a little bit of a clue as to what lies beyond. This is the Lange caliber L043.1, 415 parts, 68 joules, 18,000 vibrations per hour. It's a monster. It's a monster of mechanical engineering as well as traditional handcraft, rendered in almost Baroque form. I can't say enough about this watch, and I almost don't know where to start. But I'm going to start by talking about the kind of watchmaker who builds this. There are very few at Lange Sohne in Glashütte who are able to work on this movement. Only the master watchmakers, only those who would otherwise work on the Grand Complication, the tourbillon, the double split, are allowed to work on the Zeitwerk. The watch features far more than digital jump minutes and jump hours. There is in fact a constant force remontoire d'égalité that transfers the power from this mainspring barrel to the escapement. And it's that flow of power that helps to explain the logic of this movement. Now you start with the crown, obviously a tremendous amount of resistance, and there's actually a gearing system that allows you to gain some mechanical advantage en route to that mainspring barrel. Now the mainspring barrel itself contains an immense mainspring that's partially anchored to the barrel and partially anchored to the main plate itself. And what you actually have is a huge amount of force starting at the barrel and working its way first to the changeover of the digital minutes and then downstream through this sort of power bridge, the remontoire setup. The remontoire itself is a spring sandwiched between two third wheels that's just below my finger right there. But it's the movement of the power downstream to the balance after it's already passed through the jumping indications that defines how this watch meters its power for time regulation. So from the barrel, the power actually flows to the minutes first. At that point, it's transmitted through a series of relays. And I'll mention that right below my finger right here, there's actually an aerodynamic inertia damper wheel. What happens is it tries to slow down the runaway impulse that first activates the jump minute and then flows into the remontoire bridge. And essentially, it's an aerodynamic flywheel, like a pinwheel, that slows down the jump of the digital minutes disc itself. From there, it's transferred through a series of relays, and you can see there are individual levers and pawl jewels that are involved in locking and unlocking the transfer. And then there are two third wheels sandwiched on top of each other with a blue hairspring in between. And what that does is it stores the energy that's released after it passes through the relay past the minute wheel. It gets stored in the remontoire, and then the remontoire transmits it to a second third wheel beneath the top one that's actually in contact with the fourth wheel, and that drives the escapement wheel. And from thenceforth, it's transmitted to the pallet, and that impulses the balance wheel beating at a nice slow 2.5 hertz so you can appreciate it. The bottom line is, it's a downstream flow of power through a series of relays into a constant force metering system that ensures outstanding regulation in spite of the huge and fluctuating impulse of power that flows out of the mainspring barrel as a result of the jump minutes. That's the genius of the Zeitwerk. It's not just the portrayal of time, but how time is regulated given the power demands of that portrayal system. Now, aside from the nitty-gritty of the remontoir and the power transmission, you've got traditional finishing at its best. But it is very much a glasuta tradition, not Swiss, which is why you now see that nickel-copper alloy. Remember I mentioned that the time bridge is rhodium-plated? Well, this is untreated nickel-copper, or German silver. You can see it has a beautiful golden tinge to it. It's got richness, it's got intensity, and it has a special luster that's entirely absent from the high-flash rhodium-plated brass of Geneva. This watch has individualistic character. Even aside from its status as a Zeitwerk, you take one look and you know it's a Lange. Now you can see beyond the glashut stripen, which are distinct from Geneva waves, because we're not in Geneva and we're not in Switzerland anymore, you can see that the finishing, if you're able to get close to this watch, the high-resolution photos on our website are your friend here. Every edge features mirror-polished anglage. I wish I had a German word for it, because I feel I should use all German nomenclature when describing one of these, but I'll do my best with the terminology I've got. Every edge is polished to a smooth, hand-finished mirror shine, and it doesn't matter whether it's one of the cocks holding the escapement wheel or the balance wheel, whether it's the center of a chamfered screw, whether it's the edge of a bridge or a lever, everything shines. And the bottom line is the few places where rhodium has been used, such as on these crown and intermediate wheels of the winding system, there's also a beautiful texture and polished leaves in between each of these little teeth. The bottom line is that it's absolutely stunning, it's beguiling. I'm almost at a loss for words, and I rarely stumble in these videos, but the bottom line is this watch leaves me speechless and searching for a point to start, continue, and conclude, because I could go on forever. Each of the individual balance cocks is hand-engraved in the great Lange tradition. Each one features a unique pattern that is individual to the artisan who carved the piece. So you can actually identify the person who worked on your watch from the appearance of the engraving. And on the Zeitwerk, because you have separate cocks for the balance wheel as well as the escape wheel, you double up on the amount of engraved content, and that really enriches the view of the movement. Now, because Lange isn't able to quite preserve its traditional three-quarter bridge structure given the amount of machinery and, of course, the remontoir assembly, you get a broader view of the base plate and its gorgeous perlage patterns. Now, Lange does use a perlage of contrasting size, so around the periphery, outboard of the balance, you have a large overlapping perlage, and then inboard, a much tighter concentric circular pattern for contrast. Likewise, black polish is used in key aspects of the watch. Of course, all of the polished screw heads, as well as the click spring right here and the click itself, but you also see it on the swan's neck regulator assembly and the cover of the escape wheel cock. But you also see it on portions of the remontoir assembly itself, and this Maltese cross-style braking mechanism on top of the mainspring barrel. And I should explain that because this is so distinct from a conventional mainspring barrel, and it does have a special function. What it does is it prevents the power reserve from running down to the point at which there's still mainspring wind, and yet it doesn't have enough power to impulse and change over the minute wheels. At that point, it will automatically lock itself, much like an IWC 50,000 series caliber will lock out its last day of power reserve because it can no longer keep accurate time. The Zeitwerk will lock out its remaining power when it reaches a point at which it can no longer impulse and switch over the minute wheels. Very thoughtful, immense engineering prowess, immense finishing prowess. There's also cobalt heat-blued screws, the traditional fire-oxidized fashion. Literally everything you see here has been finished. There's nothing in here that isn't both a masterclass of engineering and a work of art, a masterpiece level work of art. Virtuosity at its best, mechanically and artistically. This really is a high point of human culture. the best of the intellect and the heart coming together in a single unit, unified beautifully and intriguingly in the Lange Sohne Zeitwerk. The name itself means time movement, or even, if you want to interpret it loosely, time machine. And that's exactly what I feel I'm looking at here. Almost like a robot wearing a tuxedo, or like I said, some sort of relic from an alternate steampunk reality. The Zeitwerk captures the imagination. It captures the heart. It's one of the few cases in which I can say the intellect and the emotion are unified in one. And this Zeitwerk, regardless of whether you're a fan of Lange, whether you prefer dress watches or sports watches, whether you like big watches or small, let me guarantee you, if you've got a heart, if you've got a mind, the Lange Sohne Zeitwerk is the watch you want.